Today we're going to take a look at the Orico M.2 magnetic SSD enclosure and SD card reader, which Orico kindly sent me for free to test and review for you guys. So first of all, the price for this is $36 on Amazon US, but Orico gave me a 30% off discount code to share with you guys, but it's only going to work with Amazon US, and also it's valid until November 19. If you want to check it out, I'm going to leave a link down below. And also they gave me a 256 gigabyte M.2 SSD. This goes for $30 but unfortunately the discount code is not going to work with that. However, if you are interested, I'm also going to leave a link for that down below. And now let's take a look at the overall design. First of all, the build quality, if I'm honest, is a bit cheap. Here everything is plastic, on the back as well. Sometimes also it makes kind of weird squeaky noises, but at least the frame around is aluminum. And then in terms of size, here is how it compares to my iPhone 16 Pro Max. Let's put it on. And now in terms of like the weight, with an SSD already mounted on the inside, it's 73.4 grams, which is relatively lightweight for what it is. And finally, obviously, if you want to mount this enclosure on your iPhone, you have MagSafe magnets on the back. And I'm happy to say that these magnets are pretty strong. And now in terms of like the ports, here is the 10 gigabits per second USB-C port. So you can plug this enclosure into pretty much any device like an iPhone, laptop, tablet, or computer. Here on the side, you have a UHS 1 SD card slot and then a micro SD card slot. But unfortunately, they do not use the spring-loaded mechanism. The way it works, you just take your SD card and just slide it in. There's no like feedback if it's inside or not. Here is the micro SD card. And because of this, it feels honestly a little bit cheap, if you will. And finally in here, there is also a 100 watt PD charging port. So if you want to charge your iPhone while using this enclosure, you can plug in a cable and charge your iPhone at the same time. However, and this might be a deal breaker for you, you cannot use a wireless microphone receiver with this charging port. I've tried it a couple of times with my iPhone and I just could not make it work. And then in terms of like installation, it's super easy to install an SSD on the inside. You will find a screwdriver in the box, and here you have like a tiny little screw which you can unscrew with this screwdriver. And then you basically open the frame here. And this is what you get on the inside. You'll also get like a thermal pad, if you will. But a couple of things to consider. It only supports up to 2 terabytes of storage. And also it only supports the M.2 2230 and 2242 protocols. But honestly, the installation process is very simple. Just one screw and you're basically good to go. All right, and now let's talk about probably the most important aspect when it comes to these kind of devices, which is the transfer disk speeds. So I tested this enclosure with my MacBook Pro using the Blackmagic disk speed test, and I got about 800 megabits per second for the write and read speeds. However, occasionally, especially for the write speeds, the speed would go down to about 200 or 300 megabits per second. I've tried different cables many times, but occasionally the speed for the write speeds would go down to 200 or 300 megabits per second. I'm not sure if this is something with the enclosure, the SSD on my computer, but I'm just sharing with you basically the results I got. And then I tried testing the micro SD card slot and then SD card slot. I plugged in my SanDisk Extreme micro SD card inside and I got 86 megabits per second for the write and read speeds. And then I plugged in my SanDisk Extreme Pro SD card, UHS 1 SD card, and I got about 78 megabits per second for the write and 86 megabits per second for the read speeds. And finally, I plugged in also my ProGrade UHS 2 300 megabits per second SD card, and I got about 80-90 megabits per second for the write speeds and 85 megabits per second for the read speeds. But then I tried to do something a bit more practical. I wanted to transfer a file from the SD card to the SSD in here. It was a 27 gigabyte file and I used my iPhone 16 Pro Max, and it took 11 minutes to copy the 27 gigabyte file from the SD card to the SSD, which is a bit long, but I think it's mainly because the protocol in here is UHS 1 and not UHS 2. But in a pinch, if you want to back up your SD card to an SSD, this basically might save your day. And now let's talk about how it worked with my iPhone. First, I tried to use it with the Blackmagic camera application. I set everything to the highest quality, ProRes 42 HQ, Apple-Log, and so on. And in 4K 25p, I managed to record until basically I filled up the storage on the inside. But then for whatever reason, I switched to 4K 120p and I could not record past 5 minutes. I would always get the same notification where it said like the recording stopped due to an unknown error or something like that. And I tried it a couple of times and I just could not record past 5 minutes for whatever reason. But honestly, I've been having a lot of issues with the Blackmagic camera application lately. So I decided, you know what, let me test the native camera application. And I did that with the highest quality settings again, ProRes 42 HQ, Apple-Log, and so on. And I managed to record with the native camera application for 15 minutes and 25 seconds until I basically filled up the entire storage on this SSD on the inside. So to summarize, I think you're getting a pretty good enclosure for the price. You get pretty strong magnets, pass-through charging to charge your device while using this SSD enclosure at the same time. And also you get an SD card slot, a micro SD card slot, so you can back up your footage while on the go. But unfortunately, the SD card slot only supports UHS 1 speeds and not UHS 2. So that's going to basically slow down the backup process. And then I don't really like the fact that I cannot use a wireless microphone receiver while using this enclosure with my iPhone. And finally, I wasn't too happy that when testing this with my computer, I got sometimes slower write speeds. But regardless, if you are interested in this, check out the link down below. Make sure to use the 30% off discount if you are from the US. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.